Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre event, putting a special spotlight on detention advocacy. My name is Con Karapanagativis. I'm the CEO and founder of the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre. Before we get into the specifics of the night, I want to start by acknowledging that we're gathering on the land of the Wurundjeri and the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne, and gathering on First Nations land all across Australia tonight. It's NAIDOC Week, a week that began in protest. And we're proud to be an organisation that stands with First Nations people, demanding treaty, demanding the Uluru Statement is embraced, demanding self-determination and agency for First Nations people, demanding a voice in Parliament. It was quite shocking this week to think that a simple request to fly the Indigenous flag at Parliament House during NAIDOC Week was knocked back by this government. A symbolic reminder that there's much work to be done. So I want to start by acknowledging the land we gather on, the land that was never ceded. Tonight, I want to just talk through, first of all, how tonight's going to work. You're going to be hearing from an amazing panelist of speakers who are at the coalface working in a detention advocacy space. And you're going to hear the challenges, the complexity, the aspirations, and the ways in which you can get involved. At the heart of all of this is a deeper dream, which is how do we get to a point where we don't have nights like tonight, where we're not having to talk about detention because we've seen an end to it, an end to mandatory detention, an end to offshore prisons, an end to anyone seeking asylum being punished for it by being locked up. Tonight, you've got a chance to ask questions in real time. You'll see the chat function in Zoom, and we ask you to please put any questions, and if time permits during our Q&A, we'll get to your questions. And if it doesn't, we promise to individually get back to every single one of you. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a supporter of the ASRC. We want you at the end of tonight to have a really up-to-the-minute special private briefing tonight as a supporters of ours around the realities of what is happening. To begin with, before I introduce our panel, I just want to talk about our detention advocacy program. This work actually began at the ASRC back in 2002. We've been doing this work for over 18 years. And during that time, we've seen Manus and Nauru opened up and closed. We've seen so many horrors and so many lives needlessly lost. The ASRC was there under the days of our amazing detention advocate of the past, Pamela Kerr, where our organisation discovered Cornelia Rao wrongfully detained. Our organisation was there when people would ring me, having broken out refugees from Woomera, asking what would we do with them, could we help? The ASRC was there when we got smuggled in ourselves, Jana and I, into Manus Island back in 2017 to put a spotlight on what was happening there, the humanitarian crisis. The ASRC was there working as we have in all this work. Everything is a team effort, led by refugees, refugee advocates, and the community sector. We're a part of it, but tonight we're obviously talking about our part. We can only speak for ourselves. But we were there when Medivac passed, the first defeat by a sitting government in 70 years in the House of Reps, freeing 200 refugees in medical care. We were there to help get kids off Nauru and play a direct role through our advocacy to free more than 1,000 people from Papua New Guinea and Nauru. But we're still here, and we don't want to be here. You know, I was on the phone just before this event speaking to a man in Kangaroo Point who's been locked up for 7 years. In fact, today is 7 years, 116 days and 14 hours. When is enough? When is enough? And as he said to me, I would just give anything just to be free tomorrow. Just let me be free tomorrow. I want to introduce our amazing panelists that you're going to be hearing from tonight. There's Jana Favero, the Director of our Advocacy and Campaigns Program. There's Sadaf Ismail, the Detention Rights Advocacy Program Manager. And there's Oggy Simic, our Advocacy Manager. But I'm going to start by introducing Oggy, our Advocacy Manager at the ASRC. Born in Sarajevo, Oggy lived in Serbia and then in Germany with his family as a refugee before arriving in Australia when he was 11 years old. Oggy has trained as a lawyer and has worked in a range of prominent campaigning and advocacy roles, all focused on championing diversity, inclusion, and human rights. Oggy, welcome. Thank you for being part of our panel tonight.
Thank you, Con. And it is so lovely seeing so many people jumping on this evening. We know that this is a difficult time for anyone with children. I was lucky enough to be able to give my 2-year-old son to our neighbours for the period of our time together tonight. I have been asked to talk briefly about my story and also my work at the ASRC. And I'm really delighted to be part of tonight's panel. When reflecting and thinking about what to talk about tonight, I realized that my story really is my mother's story. And as a father now, looking at her experiences through her lens, I think is something that is really important. My mother was born into a traditional and well-established family in Sarajevo to a father who was liberated from a concentration camp after the Second World War. When that happened, he walked from Norway to Sarajevo, which is a very long way for anyone wondering, to get home. There are probably people in the audience and with us tonight who might relate to the account which I'm going to talk about. My story is not unique and many people have had similar experiences. My mother ran a shop at the bottom of our house with 3 children. She thought that that would be something that she could do and still be with the family. In 1992, she started saying to my father that it was time to leave. She realized that our neighbors, our friends, people had stopped shopping at her store. The environment all around her was incredibly tense. Soon after, a civil war erupted all around her. She was lucky that she had friends that worked for the government who told her where she had to be and at what time in order to bring her children onto the last flight out of Sarajevo. We arrived at the airport and there were guards standing there with guns. My mother looked them in the eyes when they told her that it was not possible for her to enter and that she had to go home. She told them that there was nothing left for her at home anymore and that her and her 3 children had to move somewhere else. So she stared those men down until they finally let her through. I was 4.5 years old, and when we were at the airport, my mum was, and they were literally pointing at people, selecting people as to who could get onto that last flight out of Sarajevo. And my mother held me like a baby, thinking that that might improve her chances. We were incredibly lucky to be able to leave on that flight and arrive in Serbia, where we did have some family. My mother, 3 sons, and literally 1 suitcase. She remembered the name of the street that her cousin lived on, but she didn't know the number of the building. She'd only been there once previously, many years before that. She moved us into a taxi and told the taxi driver the name of the street and asked him to drive. And she drove for hours in the taxi trying to recognize where her family was. For almost 3 years, we lived in 1 queen size bed. Again, my mother, my 3 brothers, and my 2 brothers and myself. We lived in Serbia. We were obviously, like everyone else there, we spoke the same language. My family was Serbian by heritage, but people started referring to us as refugees and they didn't like us being there. Speaking to my uncle in Germany, my mum finally came up with a plan. She knew how she might be able to get us to another place. She organized to meet my uncle in Italy and we crossed the border into Germany after 3 days in a car together. When we arrived in Germany, we quickly told the German authorities that we were there. We didn't have permission to be there. We were placed in something that was very similar to a detention center, but it didn't have any doors. We were allowed to come and go, but we were asked to stay there overnight. It took the German government 24 hours to process our application and to decide that we were most likely genuine refugees. But I still remember that experience as one of the most vivid and horrific experiences of my life, being in a room in the center where food was brought to us on plates similar to those that you see in the movies that prisoners receive their food on. In Germany, we were very quickly provided a place to live in the community. We had access to education, we had access to school, and were making friends. It was really a wonderful place to be, but after 3 years, the German government had decided that it was time for us to either go back or go to another country because the war in Sarajevo had finished. And my mother knew that war doesn't just finish like that, doesn't switch off, that the intergenerational impacts of war are real. And as a result, tried everything once again to move us somewhere else. We'd applied to come to Australia, and they told us that that takes far too long, that we shouldn't we shouldn't get our hopes up, and that we should consider going somewhere else. But my mother was persistent. We were accepted at that point then to go to the US. My mum was really fearful going to the US, thinking that that was a place where there was no healthcare, no access to a security system. And she thought if we moved there, my brothers would most likely end up having to work, not being able to finish school in order to support the family. So she was really frightened. And she tells this story of where she was at home waiting for our flights, our tickets for the US to come through. And she heard the mail come through the door. She was in the bath at the time. She says that she couldn't get out. We were at school. She couldn't get out of the bath for hours while she was waiting. She couldn't open this letter. When she finally did, it was our visas to come to Australia. And really she was overjoyed. When we did arrive in Australia finally though, we didn't speak any English, we didn't know anyone, but we were lucky to have access to good quality community housing. My mother really thought that education was important and moved us to an area where we all had access to go to a good school. I had the opportunity then to move after school, graduate from law school, and have ever since thought about the incredible circumstances that my mother has been through, thinking that I want to give back to the community as much as people have helped us. And my mother was somebody that I look up to, because when she came to Australia, she studied as well. She became a social worker, worked as a social worker, finished a master's degree, and last year started a PhD, thinking that at the end of her career now, it's an opportunity for her to give back to the community. So all this to say that for me, a year ago, I had this incredible opportunity to start working as part of an incredible team at the ASRC. And really, the story that I've talked about today is so common for so many of the people that the ASRC comes in contact with, and the people in detention who've been there for many years now.
Okay, I wanna thank you for sharing your story, and you contrast how your family was treated to how we treat refugees now. You're playing a critical role as our advocacy manager, and recently there was an attempt by Peter Dutton to take away the phones of refugees, and you played a critical part with your team in taking on Peter Dutton. What was the outcome of that, and why was that so important for the refugees in detention we work with, like your family once was? What was so important about that win?
Well, Con, I mean, as you know, and as many of the people on the call tonight know, I'm sure know, some of the people who are in detention have been in there for over 7 years, some even longer. Mobile phones are really their lifeline, the way that they connect to the community, to their lawyers, to health professionals. So when Peter Dutton tried to take away people's mobile phones, we knew through people like Sadaf and through the people that we were talking to in detention, that people were incredibly scared and worried about this move. So we worked not just as the ASRC, but across the entire sector to mobilize together and to activate as many people as possible. We worked to set up common messaging, common hashtag, and talked as broadly as possible about the impacts of the legislation. We realized that Jackie Lambie in Tasmania was really the critical person who the vote was going to come down in the end. Through the ASRC, over 40,000 people made contact with Jackie Lambie, and through other organizations like Get Up and the Human Rights Law Centre and Amnesty and others, even more people took action. And as you know, some weeks ago, we found out that she'd been contacted by over 100,000 people, and that over 90% of those people, I think over 95% of those people had said to her that they didn't support the legislation, that they didn't want to be people in detention to be treated even worse than what they already are. And as a result, she decided that she wouldn't side with the government on this occasion. And the people in detention that we work with, speaking to them after we found out, was really quite an incredible experience. It, huge difference to their lives.
Okay, thank you so much for talking about the importance of that work and ensuring that critical lifeline for refugees in detention. And thank you also for sharing your story and all your work. We'll come back to you when we get to our Q&A, but thank you so much. It's my pleasure now to introduce Sadaf Ismail. Sadaf has a background lecturing in international relations and working in the non-for-profit sector with disadvantaged communities. Sadaf originally comes from Pakistan, arriving as a migrant herself 25 years ago before joining the advocacy and detention advocacy program about a year and a half ago, right at the peak of Medivac. And Sadaf is the manager for Detention Rights Advocacy Program. Sadaf, can we start by getting you just to kind of demystify and unpack exactly what does that program do? When we talk about doing casework in detention, a lot of people really struggle to understand what exactly does that mean? Why is it important to the refugees in detention, of which there are now 290 still in Papua New Guinea, Nauru, 200 in Kangaroo Point and Mantra, and over 1,000 more in community detention limbo. Why is this program so important, and what exactly are you overseeing and leading as our manager of that program?
Sure, Con. First of all, thank you everyone for joining us tonight and to hear what we do at ASRC Detention Rights Advocacy Program. We provide casework support services with the end goal of ending arbitrary detention. We do that through a number of different ways. We provide information to the clients about complexities of Australia's migration policies. We, on behalf of the clients, we work very closely with medical professionals. We seek their medical records so that we can advocate for their medical treatment. And then when we find out about clients being extremely unwell, we try to contact them through various means, and then we intervene in highly critical situations of suicidality and self-harm. We conduct risk assessments for them, and we try to inject hope and provide emotional support. And on top of that, we hold the authorities accountable by providing them notification about the client's conditions and just ask them to pay attention to the duty of care which they are supposed to provide to the clients. And we just highlight the neglect that they are putting the clients through. And apart from that, we also assist the clients with their decision about resettlement options, resettlement to third countries options. We give them as much information as possible so that the clients make an informed decisions about their life. We support clients' voices for self-advocacy, and also we advocate on their behalf when their self-advocacy is not possible. We also highlight conditions of detention when clients go through different sorts of ill treatment during their time in detention. So we highlight those conditions of detention, and also we assist with their complaints and requests to Border Force, to IHMS, and to other organizations. And also we liaise with UNHCR about their condition. So it's
Can I ask you, like there was a lot of excitement when, our program, the one that you lead, was directly involved in caseworking every single one of the 200 people that got here. We played that critical engine room role with our sector. We got people here for medical care. We helped get people here off the kids off the roof, but many are stuck in detention. So there was the initial elation of getting people off Nauru and Papua New Guinea, but the fight is far from over. So we do all this critical work. What are the challenges that you're hearing and you and your team are hearing every day at the moment? The 200 people in Mantra and Kangaroo Point, but hundreds more from Christmas Island onwards that are spread across this awful detention prison network. what are the key issues and themes, especially after 7 years, that people are raising? What's a typical day look like for our detention caseworkers?
Fawn, as you can imagine, that prolonged uncertainty has caused severe physical and mental health concerns, and inadequate services which have been provided to the clients have resulted in deterioration of mental health and suicide ideation. And the clients feel helpless and they have no prospects because there is no pathway provided to them for their freedom. They suffer from some family separation. Quite often they are not able to meet their spouses, their children, their parents, so they are in isolation. And then on top of that, there's arbitrary movement. Their clients, without any notice, are made to move from one detention center to another detention center on a regular basis. And when they went offshore, they also faced violence and threats from local communities as well. So sexual assault and abuse of power were regular occurrences at that time.
So Duff, we know what is clear here, that detention is not there to process people, but to break people. And one of the key questions one of our donors has asked tonight is, are we optimistic that the 200 refugee men that are being held in Kangaroo Point and Mantra are going to be released into the community? And is the community able to actually support those men if they were released?
Well, the situation is this, that this government for so many years have put their clients in this detention without any accountability. Minister can intervene with a stroke of pen, and they can do it, but they are not doing it. At the moment, they have not given any clear pathway for their resettlement. But it is possible, and that's why ASRC, together with the support of the community, continues to advocate for the release of the clients. And if the clients do get released, then they obviously need a number of systems to support them, because they have been in detention for such a long period of time that they have lost basic skills, precious years of their lives. They have lost their skills to take care of themselves. So we will need to provide them all gamut of services, from accommodation to food, linking them to employment, to education, so that they'd be able to eventually find their own feet, which they are very keen to participate in the society, but they are not allowed to do that.
So in the last minute before we go to a video, at the heart of this, what you're telling me is the only thing stopping this is political will and leadership. We can do it. The community wants to support the men. They can support the men. It's not that it's going to be easy, but we can. But it's just a lack of political will and leadership, isn't it?
Exactly right.
So Duff, thank you so much. Thank you for the work that your team does. Thank you for continuing to fight the good fight. And I know at the moment the Detention Rights Advocacy Program is now going to be working even closer with our lawyers and our campaign advocates, focusing specifically on how do we get as many refugees released from detention as we can. And that is our number one priority right now, is you can't make detention any more humane. We need people free. Thank you so much, Sadaf, again, and we'll come back to you for our Q&A panel. I'm now going to introduce you. You're about to see a video by Farhad Bardesh. He's a Kurdish refugee who's detained himself. He was first on Manus Island and then forcibly moved to first Mantra and now the Mida Detention Prison in Broadmeadows, just kilometres from where I'm speaking to you, where he's protested the cramped conditions. In fact, he was moved from Mantra to Mida as punishment for being a vocal advocate. And he's one of the faces of the Time for Home campaign you see at the moment, calling for the Prime Minister to release every refugee from detention by World Refugee Day. It's my pleasure to introduce his video, One Man's Search for the Sun.
My name is Farhad Bandesh. I am a Kurdish refugee. My artwork shows the reality and the suffering from the cruel policy and its lack of humanity in this country. And I think my artwork and songs shows the pain of those people are in detention centers for no reason, and they have no committed crime, and they should be with the people in the community and start their life. Sometimes I am really happy to create some music or artwork. It's mixture. Sometimes I think I am still alive, but most of the time I think I am dead. I am like walking dead. And when my friends call me and talk with me, I think I am still alive. Detention is limited. You cannot practice on your music, you cannot practice on your art. You cannot talk to your family and friends. And you know, this time they try to take the phones from us. The phone is our heart. They want to take this heart from us. And this is not something to forget. We need to fight and fight for these things. And I think in detention centers, you cannot do anything. After 7 years being imprisoned by the Australian government, this is the time they can release us. We need to be safe. We are all human beings. I think we need to be united to try to get this right back for those people who are innocent. It's come from my family, my friends, and it's like a bridge. Doesn't matter, I am inside detention centers and I cannot reach freedom, but there is hope. The hope is from my family and friends, and I can call it's love. The love is our hope. Promote this fighting against this cruel policy and racism. And there is lots of ways, like speaking out in media, talk with the media is the best. And I'm here to invite those people who doing these things. I think we need you to do more and more and never give up, because we need you. This is the time to release those people are for 7 years and some people for 10 years in detention center for no crime. The reason is looking for freedom, looking for safety. And I think we all need to be united in any way they can to fight for against this cruel policy.
Look at that. Farhad is an incredible man, an incredibly talented artist. And you think about, he's had 7 of the best years of his life stolen for what? Think about what that man could be contributing to our community, but he shouldn't even have to be contributing anything just to be free. A man found to be a refugee, punished for being brave enough to speak out and use his voice, and kind enough to do that for us, and we're incredibly grateful to him. Before I introduce our next panelist, I had a few people asking, how is this possible? And in 30 seconds, what people need to understand is the reason Dutton and Tudge can run this system of brutality and cruelty is, unlike Australian prisons, there are no laws or statutory frameworks, there are no minimum standards, there's no independent statutory oversight or statutory body to hold people to account. Australia is the only Western country in the world with a policy that allows the indefinite mandatory detention of men, women, and children, that allows families like the Biloella family in the middle of the night to be abducted and sent to Christmas Island. And this is one of the things that I'm going to get our next guest to speak about the change we're trying to get, because we need massive reform of a broken, brutal system. Our next guest is Jana Favero. Jana's been at the ACC for more than a decade. She is the director of our advocacy and campaigns program. Her lifelong passion and commitment to refugees began when she was just 6 and visited a refugee camp with her family in Pakistan. Jana, I want to start by sharing tonight, what is the work that we are doing in Parliament around trying to free people from detention? What does that look like? And what have been the challenges of trying to do that remotely during COVID?
Thanks, Con. Well, you've heard from Oggy about the grassroots mobilisation that we've been doing. We've really realised that, you know, Parliament, and in particular the government, has the power to change what's happening to people in detention. The only thing standing between detention and freedom for people seeking asylum and refugees is the government. So we really need to be working directly with the government to pressure the government to change their current policies. I mean, just imagine how powerful it'd be if people like Farhad could actually tell their story in Parliament. And there are others like Farhad who are living in the community, but one of the challenges with COVID is that we can't visit Parliament. And that has been really, really challenging. I don't think I ever realised how powerful or impactful it is actually being in the corridors of Parliament. As an example, during the Prohibiting Items Bill, we would normally be in Parliament just sitting in the corridor, seeing who the government were briefing, and then we knew that we then had to respond to the government's briefing. We couldn't see that, we didn't have any visibility over it. We weren't able to organise events on the lawns of Parliament and then get politicians to come out and see what was happening, as we did under Kids Off Naroon Back the Bill. During those campaigns, we were in Parliament every single sitting week. We were sitting in the office of parliamentarians. We were able to hear what was happening. We sometimes sat on the floor of the House or the Senate with advisors, because they would be getting text messages, because the government does all this wrangling and so much misinformation. I mean, we know that when Peter Dutton was trying to convince Darren Hinch to not back Medivac, he went in with photos and saying, this man has done this, this man has done that, all lies. And we only knew that because we're in the halls of Parliament. We can also brief journalists and get ahead of the media story. So not being able to be there has been a real challenge. But because of all the great relationships that we built, and through sector partnerships, but also directly with a lot of politicians, we've been able to continue all those briefings over the phone, all of them virtually, able to mobilise people digitally. So while it has been a challenge, we have still been really successful. But I am looking forward to, when it's safe to do so, being able to travel back to Parliament, because that is the biggest impact we can have, is convincing politicians they need to change the policies that people are free.
One of the things, before I get to the next question that's not scripted here, is the ACC doesn't take any money from the federal government, and we don't align ourselves with any political or religious organisation. What does that mean for us when we're in Parliament, around when we give advice, when we reach out across the breadth of, like, who is willing to engage with us, and what is the access we have because of that independence?
Well, the access because of the independence means that we are apolitical. So people will always know that when we request a meeting, we are speaking about what is best for people seeking asylum and refugees. We're not doing it for a political agenda. We're not doing it for any other reason rather than what's best for people seeking asylum and refugees. And that can't be underestimated. There are times when we, as a coalition, with other organisations, we divide up who is requesting the meetings, and time again, it's ASRC that secures more meetings than a lot of the other organisations because they know that we're there purely to discuss the issue. And also I think that as there are more and more independents and crossbench who are in Parliament, they really look to independent organisations, you know, like Crossing the Halls with Jackie Lambie. I mean, she knows that Con will call out what's happening, which is similar to what she does. You know, Andrew Wilkie, I remember when I started over 10 years ago, I went to Parliament. He was the only person who would meet with me at ASRC, and that has grown. So now we really are able to secure meetings because of that fierce independence. And we will, if the Greens or Labor or Independents, however they're voting on a bill, we will always lobby exactly the same to whoever it is we're speaking to, because it's about the issue. It's not about the politics or the party. And I think because we're respected for that, we can have greater influence.
Jana, within that, there's a question from one of our donors, which is which MPs actually support getting refugees out of detention or are more sympathetic to dealing ethically with the treatment of refugees in detention? Who are our champions? Who gets it when we're in Canberra?
The standouts for progressive refugee policy would be the Greens and the crossbench. If you have a look at their policies, we have done scorecards in the past where we just rank where different parties stand on their policies. So the Greens and Independents crossbench, absolutely, including Central Alliance. I think what a lot of people don't know, and I think this is actually a failure of Labor, is that Labor is actually, their policies are really quite good on refugees, including those in detention. They have signed up to saying refugees should be released from detention, saying there should be time limits on detention for 90 days. I mean, currently, the average of people being detained is over 2 years, and some people up to 8 or 10 years. Labor have also said that increasing humanitarian intake, they would accept the New Zealand deal so people would be resettled. So I think that quite often the biggest question I get is, oh, it's a race to the bottom, the two political parties aren't that different. That may have been true once upon a time, but it's not true anymore. So I would say that every politician, apart from those who are in the LNP, are much better on refugee and asylum seeker policy.
Jana, one of the things a lot of our supporters might not know about is Dutton and Tudge haven't stopped. So they try to silence refugees in detention and we defeated them as a movement. But they're trying to pass through a thing called the Strengthening Character Bill. And on the surface, oh, that sounds innocent enough. And yet it's in some ways even more dangerous than the phone bill. What is Dutton and Tudge trying to get by that would have profound consequences for the human rights of refugees at the moment?
So the Strengthening the Character Test Bill would allow them to cancel the visas of people who are currently in the community. So that means people are being found to be refugees. And the estimates from the government's own department are that it would result in a 4 to 5-fold increase of people being put into detention. So while prohibiting items was about people in detention, this bill is actually about putting more people in detention. And it completely undermines the criminal justice system because it means someone can serve their time for a very minor offence, but then they would be detained for the maximum length of that sentence. And I mean, our principal solicitor, Dr. Carolyn Graydon, always says that you could sneeze and get detained because that is how much strength the government already has in being able to cancel visas. But now it's pretty much you would blink and you could be detained. It's for very, very, very minor offences. And we are deeply concerned because, as we know, once people get into the detention system, it is so hard to get them out because of legal limited options, because of lack of oversight, lack of transparency. So it is a really, really dangerous bill. We have so far avoided it getting debated in the Senate, which has been great. But again, it will come down to Rex Patrick and Jackie Lambie, and it's expected it will probably be listed in the December sitting weeks. But that is a huge priority around defeating that bill as well, because it will have a devastating impact on the government putting people in detention, as I said, for very minor offences.
One of the great things is our access, isn't it? The ability to be able to work with Jackie Lambie, Rex Patrick, Central Alliance, the Greens, Helen Haynes, Zali Steggall, Andrew Wilkie, and key people in Labor. Pretty much outside of Qatar and One Nation, we're able to actually directly brief, and we've done submissions, haven't we, to Senate inquiries on all these bills?
Yes, we have. And that was another thing about being remote, is we're no longer able to, when we appear before Senate estimates, to be in person and see the senators. It's all remotely, which is another challenge. And even with the last Parliament, there were many more small L Liberals who we could get access with and talk to. You know, when Julia Banks, we saw her leave, she was very progressive on this issue. She voted for Medivac. Craig Lundy, there are a couple of others, whereas now the sort of small L Liberals, there are less and less, but we still do try. We always invite, the amount of times we've invited Minister Tudge or Minister Dutton to meetings and to briefings, But really we do, apart from those, we do have really great access. And we know the crossbench hold power. A lot of votes come down to it. And so by continuing to keep a really strong relationship with the crossbench, that is why we still do have hope, not necessarily for a parliamentary pathway because the government hold the numbers, but for political opportunity of making sure, like Andrew Wilkie this week spoke about the Time for a Home campaign in Parliament and called on all other MPs to join him. And that was, you know, we briefed him a couple of hours before it happened. And so that does to show the power of those excellent relationships and then getting comments in Parliament, which once upon a time would have been a challenge.
And in 15 seconds, we also did some polling, didn't we, around community attitudes from Liberal Party voters. And what did we find around detention and resettlement?
Yeah, so the polling found that the majority of people found that once you've been found to be a refugee, you should be released from detention, should be resettled as a priority, including the majority of LNP voters. So even the government is out of step with their own constituents and voters, and that's something we're really trying to highlight as well as part of the campaign, but directly in dialogue with LNP politicians.
Jana, a lot of our supporters are concerned about the Biloella family on Christmas Island. What's the latest there? Why the heck is that precious family and those beautiful children rotting away in a maximum security prison on Christmas Island?
It's a very good question. I wish I had the answer. It's because of the mindset of Peter Dutton. I mean, we had Alan Jones speaking out saying the family would be released, even Jackie Lambie. Like, you'd think that if Alan Jones can't convince Peter Dutton to release someone, it is just pure ideology as to why they're not being released. They still do have a legal case on foot. They have got great support in their local community. It is something that is raised every time in meetings of parliamentarians, Senate estimates. Nick McKim asked a whole lot of questions, and it came out then that the kids are escorted by guards to school, even though they're in Christmas Island compound. So it's just something that it is just at the will of Peter Dutton, which is why it's so dangerous that so many powers sit within the one person. Because if that one person doesn't have the will or the ideology to release people, then they control everything. So that's the real danger there. And so that family, I mean, they have been detained. They are on Christmas Island. They're trying to move them out of sight and out of mind. But I would encourage everyone, just keep mentioning them in your social media. Keep talking to your friends about them. Keep calling your local politicians about that family in particular, to know that the government are just trying to wear down the sector, wear down individuals so that we'll just give up. But that is not going to happen.
Jana, in a minute, how do we work around this work with both our lawyers and our sector? How do we work around trying to get people released, trying to get detention reform, trying to stop these draconian laws? What are we doing right now?
Yeah, as you mentioned, internally, we have sort of three areas that focus on detention, release and rights. We have campaigns and advocacy with Olgie and Marcella and the team. We have Sadaf and her team with detention rights, and Carolyn and her team with the legal program. So we're really working together to have the same strategic priority and use our strength as three programs internally with a clearly aligned goal of release for people and challenging systemic change, whether it's calling for a royal commission, whether it's time limits on detention, greater oversight and transparency. We also work externally. We took part in a closed briefing to the Ombudsman's office last week to let them know about conditions in detention. We have pro bono legal firms. We brief the Royal Medical Colleges. We work across the sector with the peak bodies, with faith-based organisations as well, because we know that united we are stronger and we can't do this alone. There are incredible individuals, groups and organisations who have been doing refugee advocacy for many, many, many years. And we know that the focus, like one of the priorities, is people in detention. Not only do they not have their freedom, but they have their human rights abused every single day by being locked up. So the collaboration is not only internal at ASRC, but it's also external and it's national as a national issue.
Jana, very briefly, because I'm running out of time. What are we doing in the offshore space? There are still 290 people held forcibly, refugees in Papua New Guinea and Nauru. What are we doing there?
Yeah, the main support we're providing is through the Detention Rights Advocacy Program, which is casework and counselling to people who are held offshore. We are also, as part of the Time for a Home campaign, looking for resettlement options, so pressuring the government to accept the New Zealand deal. Now with the US election results, hoping to engage with the US government on perhaps taking more refugees to be resettled there. So we're really prioritising resettlement for people who are still offshore, continuing to pressure the government, providing direct support to them. Unfortunately, the legal options are really, really limited. However, we won't stop our fight in the public arena and then also more privately through counselling and casework support. But we know that it's the conditions there and being trapped on Papua New Guinea or in Nauru that affects people's mental health. So we will fight until they're all free.
Last question before I go to Oggy. Another donor asked, are there any examples of countries that do it well? In 60 seconds, who could we be more like that's compassionate, that settles people in the community, doesn't lock people up indefinitely? Are there good examples out there globally?
Well, the leaders would be Canada and New Zealand in terms of offering resettlement programs. There are other countries such as Scandinavian countries, and even the UK has time limits on detention. I think it's 5 for children in detention. I know the UK are currently looking at Australia as an example to set up some sort of offshore processing, and we'll actually be giving a briefing in 2 weeks to lead UK campaign organisations, but probably New Zealand and Canada, because they don't make this political. It's about what's best for refugees rather than who's in power, and that there has been that bipartisan support from those countries.
Great. Thank you, Jana. Thank you so much for speaking tonight. I'm going to turn back to Oggy. Oggy, can you, a lot of times people look at what's happening in this detention space, it's been 7 years too long, and they feel helpless. They're like, well, what more can I do? Can you talk about what is the power of one voice combined with the voices of many? Why are we still hopeful here at the ASRC? Why are we still fighting this good fight almost 20 years later? Why do we think change is possible? And what's the power of each voice?
Yeah, thank you, Con. Really good question. And really, I mean, question goes to the heart as to why I'm at the ASRC. Our work is very much about mobilizing people in order to take the power back from the government. And we know that when people get together that this is possible. You're right. If you go to the campaign's website that we've just launched called Time for a Home, it's been 7 years, 116 days, 15 hours, 17 minutes and 14 seconds that people many people have been locked up in detention. So the campaign's very much about saying that enough is enough. We know that people seeking asylum and refugees in detention have lived for too long without a home, deprived of their freedom and their futures. The Time for a Home campaign is calling on the government to immediately release refugees in immigration detention and commit to a pathway for their resettlement. This campaign was launched just last week, but already over 100 organizations have signed up to the campaign. If you go to the website, timeforahome.com.au, you'll see a message there from Saif, from Moz, from Fahad, who are in detention, calling for the refugee sector, for our community, for people to get together, to come together and to take the power back from the government. And that's really what we need to do next.
Thank you, Oggy. And whenever you're looking at this and going, how are we going to get people out together? Remember when people thought it was going to be impossible to get kids off Nauru, but together we did. When people thought it was going to be impossible to get Medivac passed, and we did, and hundreds of people were medically evacuated. We've been here before with Nauru and Papua New Guinea back in the 2000s, and we shut them down, and we will again. I had one other donor asking about very quickly, why are there no consequences for Tudge and Tudden around contempt of court recently with Tudge when it came to not releasing a person found to be a refugee? This is what we're fighting for: scrutiny, statutory legal oversight and accountability. They are a law unto themselves. That's why there has been 45 deaths in detention centers since 2010. That's why there's been 4,500 assaults by guards in detention centers in the last 5 years. This is a culture of impunity. And we're going to hold a spotlight to this, to stop those abuses, to hold this government to account, to stop more bad laws, but most importantly, to free every refugee from detention and see an end to the policy of mandatory detention and these offshore hellholes. There's no place in a civilized society for any of them. I'm going to go to a Q&A. These are all questions from you. And I'm going to start with you, Sadaf. One of our donors has asked, how do you maintain the energy and stay sane in your line of work? How do you keep yourself going, given what we're facing into?
That's a good question. Thank you, Con. Well, we do find it very challenging, and it is very frustrating for us that we work so hard, but this government continues with its brutality. but the energy and resilience of the clients helps us. We understand the clients have come here, they have been fleeing persecution, they have tried to come here to a safe place, but they have been faced with such hostile environment and harmful, and it's so harmful for their personal safety, for their mental and physical health. So we have to be there. We just simply cannot give up. That is just simply not an option for us. So we have to be there for the clients when the clients are sad, when they're angry, when they are depressed. So we have to provide them support. So it's just that their resilience keeps us going. And we do try to encourage each other within the team and provide support to each other within the team in doing so.
Thank you so much, Sadaf. Jana, another donor has asked, what is the main legal obstacle to challenging the government's ability to keep people in indefinite detention, given that seeking asylum is not a crime?
The main obstacle is the government. Every time we seem to win in the courts or win at law, they just change the law. So when they get the majority in Parliament, which they have currently, they push through laws that close any possible loopholes. I mean, Medivac was a perfect example. We were able to get that passed. It was a law that enabled sick refugees to be able to access appropriate healthcare in Australia, and then the government said it was one of their priorities and they repealed it. So the main obstacle is really the government itself and the ideology of the government, and also, as Con mentioned before, the lack of oversight and transparency. Even the Ombudsman Office, who is responsible for overseeing the government's role in detention. As I said, we met with them last week and they said that they raised the complaints, they raised these issues with the government. But where do they get the answers from and all the information? From the government. So they only get a certain point of view. And we know that when they go in and do the visits in detention, and this is what happens offshore as well, you know, miraculously people have access to what they want. They only meet a select group of people. It's just complete power and control with the government, and they're trying to hide what's happening in detention. So that also makes it really challenging then legally to find out. I mean, recently there was a win in Victoria, finding that it was harmful for a man to continue to be detained. And so what did the government do? They didn't release him into the community. They transferred him to WA to another detention centre. So the legal obstacle is the majority of the government to be able to pass the laws that they want, and then also the lack of transparency and accountability, and the powers that sit within that one minister, Minister Dutton.
Jana, I'm just going to ask you a follow-up question. A lot of people know about the 290 refugees in Papua New Guinea and Nauru still detained there. They know about the 200 men locked up in Mantra and in Kangaroo Point. There's another 300 plus in detention centres across Australia. A lot of people don't know about people in community detention, and 1,000 predominantly women and children that are in limbo that the government's dumping onto the streets just before Christmas or just after Christmas. In 2 minutes, can you bring people up to speed with what we mean by community detention and what's happening there? Because there are more than 1,000 more people in an almost equally awful situation that we're fighting for. What's happening there?
Sure. You're giving me 15 seconds, 2 minutes, Con. I could give a whole lecture on this. It's like speed dating. And I'm probably speaking really quickly, so I apologise. But people who are in community detention, the government has decided, people who have been transferred from Manus and Nauru, to move them onto final departure bridging visas.
Before you jump a sec, Jana, sorry to interrupt. You've got 3 minutes. What's community detention? So what's happened here with women and children being brought from Nauru, many of those kids off Nauru, and they're put into community detention? What is that? And what's happening to them now?
Yeah, so community detention is supported housing and a caseworker. People do not have the right to work. So on the one hand, it is detention. They don't have complete freedom, but they also do receive an adequate level of support in terms of housing and income support and a caseworker. So while we don't agree with any forms of detention, community detention is better than being in detention. And it's also, for a lot of people, better than being kicked out onto the street, especially during a pandemic. Great, they get the right to work. Great, they can move where they want. But if you've been in community detention or been in detention for 6 or 7 years, your capacity to get a job really quickly is limited, especially if you have young children and you've got carer responsibilities. So what the government's doing is moving people from community detention onto final departure bridging visas, which will have a maximum validity of 6 months. So who can find a job if your visa only goes for 6 months? So they do get the right to work. But from the day they get the letter telling them that they're being moved, they lose all income support overnight and they have 3 weeks to find their own housing. So this has already happened around the country. It has not happened in Victoria yet, but we're expecting it to happen soon. We had a meeting with Department of Home Affairs last week and sector meetings, but it's just another example of the government's callousness and a reminder that they can do what they want to people seeking asylum and to refugees, because their rights are not preserved under laws in Australia. And what it means is not only the devastating impact on those individuals, but charities across Australia are stretched. ASRC has already seen a 4-time increase because of lack of COVID benefits and entitlements to people seeking asylum. So we're at a real cliff for people not having housing, not having support, and then organisations just not even having the capacity to respond. It will result in forced destitution and homelessness of men, women and children. Don't worry, it's something that we will be fighting and we'll be advocating on. A small bit of good news is that delays in Victoria, they were supposed to happen next week. We've been able to delay that until the middle of January. It's not much, but at least it gives a bit more time to continue to advocate. But we are deeply concerned. We've seen what's happened in the other states. We know that there are more people in that situation in Victoria who will be impacted by. So we're trying to work out and collaborate service delivery, what we can do to respond, but then also from an advocacy point of view and push back onto the government, the federal government.
And one of the things that we use our independence at that meeting with Home Affairs this week to say, we'll be sending them to Home Affairs for housing help and for emergency assistance, because you're not going to dump vulnerable people in the middle of a pandemic and think you're not going to get called out. So just so our supporters know, face to their face, we told it to them like it was. We said we're going to expose this, we're going to call this out, and we're going to push back, and we're not going to wear it. And that's the important thing, is that everything you're hearing, we don't want you to drop your head. We're going to keep fighting the good fight on everything. We're never going to give up. We're going to finish with Oggy. He's going to finish on the perfect note, which is, Oggy, how can people get involved? And you know, what's the most effective thing members of the public can do right now to support what we're trying to do? Free people from detention. What's the most effective thing people that are watching tonight could do to help make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about here as well. There's so much that we can do collectively. I'll talk about 2 things specifically. First is to get involved with the Time for a Home campaign. So if you go to the website, timeforahome.com.au, you'll see that there's an option there to sign up and to join the campaign. We've got some of the best advocates across the sector working together on a political strategy. We're going to continue with the political advocacy work, media, organising, mobilising, digital advocacy work, whatever it takes to get the outcome that's needed. The other thing that I'll touch on really briefly is that the polling that Con referred to earlier showed that there are a lot of people who support us and are with us. There are some people that the polling shows are completely against us, but there's a huge number of people in the middle that are persuadable and people that we can talk to in order to grow the number of people in support. Some of those people might be people that you work with, people that you are in contact with. And it's really important that we talk to people around values. And we have a program at the ASRC called Breakthrough Conversations, which if you go to our website, you can sign up to participate and learn more about this. Really at the heart of all of our approach and what the ASRC really focuses on is making sure that people with lived experience, that people who are in detention, that people who have been impacted are speaking for themselves and advocating for themselves. So we put and have programs in place to support this work. But really, right now, Time for a Home campaign is where I hope I'll see all of you next. We're going to be working on this collectively across the sector, across organisations, across disciplines to get the outcomes that we need. So timeforahome.com.au and sign up.
Thank you, Oggy. Thank you, Jana. Thank you, Sadav. Look, just to know, we're going to keep fighting the good fight everywhere we have to. We're going to keep running Australia's only casework program for people in detention. This is the only program of its type, and we're going to keep fighting that good fight. We're going to keep providing practical support to men in detention, whether it's a phone or a phone card to stay connected to the community. We're going to keep critically linking people with medical care and psychiatric care, and our lawyers are going to keep fighting through the courts to get people released. We're going to keep using our independence to campaign to amplify the voices of refugees and hold this government to account. So whether it's submissions to the Senate, in the halls of Parliament, or on our social media, we will never be silent, because that's the power of our independence. If you want to find out more, go to timeforahome.com.au. We're going to be launching our end of year appeal, all focused around detention, because we want to make this the pressing political issue when it comes to human rights in this country. Most importantly, just keep your heads up, get involved in our campaigns. We've also got a big volunteer recruitment drive going on right now. So if any of you would like to roll up your sleeves, and there's a stack of volunteer roles, both remotely and in person in 2021 that we're recruiting for. So what I always say, donate, advocate, participate. Don't be a bystander. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your passion. No, we are not going to stop until every single refugee, onshore and offshore, is out of detention. We are not going to be silent. We are not going to be bystanders. We're going to hold these peoples, the Duttons and Tudgers, we're going to hold their feet to the fire. We're going to stand in solidarity with refugees, and together, as this amazing movement of compassion and justice and hope, we are going to win, because we have truth, justice, and we are on the right side of history together. So thank you for your support. Let's keep standing strong together. Let's keep amplifying the voices of refugees, and let's keep fighting together until every refugee is safe and free in the community with permanency, human rights, dignity, and the right to be an Australian like me and you, included, valued, and free. Stay safe, take care of yourselves, and thank you so much for your support and for being part of this special night. We're so incredibly grateful for you standing with us tonight. Thank you. Stay safe and take care. And thank you to all our panelists and our amazing fundraising and marketing team who made tonight possible as well. Thank you, everyone. Take care and stay safe.